Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something pretty wild, using LLMs to guide swarm intelligence.
Yeah, LLMs like ChatGPT guiding flocks of birds.
It's like AI that can write poetry can also lead a colony of ants. This research paper we're looking at explores exactly that.
It is fascinating. Using LLMs, which are trained on tons of text, to control agents and systems that have always been driven by rules and algorithms.
Truly novel approach.
Yeah.
And this paper looks at two classic swarm intelligence examples, ant foraging and bird flocking. The big question they're trying to answer is, can an LLM really learn these complex behaviors?
Right, and just from text prompts.
Exactly, just from text prompts. And how do
Yeah.
they compare to agents programmed with, those traditional rules?
So to get why this is so interesting, we need to kind of zoom out and look at swarm intelligence in general. The core principles, it's all about self-organization.
Okay, so no one central brain controlling everything.
Right. Think of it this way. Each agent, each individual is just following a simple set of rules.
Okay, got it.
But then the magic happens when all those agents interact. Those simple rules lead to really complex group behavior.
Like a school of fish.
Exactly. Each fish is just reacting to its neighbors, trying to stay close, but also not bump into each other.
Avoid collisions.
Right. And it's all those tiny local interactions that lead to that beautiful coordinated movement of the entire school.
So back to the paper. The researchers started with a classic NetLogo ant foraging simulation. So you have these ants, and they use pheromone trails to find and collect food. And the challenge here was to replace all those hard-coded rules that the ants normally follow with an LLM.
Wow.
And what I thought was really interesting is the LLM didn't actually see the simulation.
Oh, interesting.
It only got these text descriptions of the ant's surroundings.
Right.
So things like pheromone levels or how strong the nest scent is.
Okay.
And then based on just that limited information, the LLM had to figure out what the ant should do, give it instructions. And those instructions had to be in a very specific format.
Which was?
A Python dictionary, which basically tells the simulation exactly what action the ant should take, like which direction to move in.
Got it.
So it's like the LLM is thinking like an ant, but only through words.
That's wild.
And the paper goes into this whole process of prompt engineering. They had to keep testing and refining the instructions that they were giving to the LLM to get it to work. What were some of the things that stood out to you about that process?
Well, at first the prompts were very, very general. Something like find food, mark the path, and use the nest scent to get back home.
Right, high level.
Very high level. And unsurprisingly, the ants were all over the place.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like they had the general idea, but no clue how to actually do it.
Totally. So the researchers started adding more specific instructions, like telling the ant to prioritize the nest scent over pheromone when it's carrying food.
Okay, makes sense.
And then they found something surprising. Just giving the ant directional cues like stronger nest scent to the left worked way better than giving it precise numerical values.
Oh, wow. That is surprising. So it wasn't just about giving the LLM more data.
Yeah.
It was about framing that information in a way that made sense to it.
Exactly. And that's a really key takeaway here. How we phrase things, even for an AI, can totally change how it interprets and uses that information.
Huge implications.
Yeah.
So after a lot of tweaking, they got to a point where the LLM could guide the ants pretty reliably. But they didn't stop there.
No, of course not. What do they do?
They wanted to compare 3 different types of colonies, so they had all rule-based ants.
Okay.
They had all LLM-driven ants.
Got it.
And then they had this hybrid colony with a mix of both.
Cool.
What was the most interesting thing you saw in those results?
The hybrid colonies often outperform the others,
Interesting.
which suggests that there's something powerful about combining those strengths, the efficiency of the rules with the adaptability of the LLM.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that hybrid approach could work in other complex systems, too.
For sure. It's a really exciting area for future research. Imagine using that for something like coordinating robots in a search and rescue mission. You need both predictability and adaptability.
Definitely. So we've seen how LLMs can guide ants, but now let's take to the skies and talk about bird flocking. In the next part, we'll see how their researchers tackled using an LLM to guide bird agents based on, those classic flocking principles.
Separation.
Alignment.
Cohesion.
Exactly. Yeah, that hybrid colony idea is so cool. Mixing those rule-based agents with the flexibility of the LLM really makes you think.
It really changes how we think about building these intelligent systems. Instead of relying on just hard-coded rules, we can use LLMs to tap into a more, adaptable kind of intelligence, one that understands context.
So where do you see this going? What are some real-world applications where we could see this LLM-guided swarm approach really take off?
I think robotics is a huge one. Think about swarms of robots working together in like a disaster zone,
Okay, yeah.
searching for survivors, clearing debris,
Hmm.
maybe even like building those temporary shelters. In those crazy situations, having robots that can adapt and learn on the fly would be amazing.
A total game changer.
Right. Instead of just being limited to pre-programmed tasks, they could actually assess the situation, work as a team.
Come up with solutions in real time.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just reacting to the environment. Think about things like environmental monitoring,
Okay.
remediation. You could have swarms of drones equipped with all kinds of sensors, and they could analyze air quality, pinpoint pollution sources, maybe even collaborate to actually neutralize contaminants.
That's awesome, like a self-organizing cleanup crew for the planet.
Yeah. And then there's this whole world of logistics and optimization. Imagine LLM-guided swarms that could revolutionize traffic flow in cities, optimizing routes in real time to reduce congestion, or managing the flow of goods and resources in like a global supply chain.
Adapting to disruptions and changes in demand.
Right, and all with incredible agility.
It seems like almost any complex system could benefit from this kind of approach.
I think so. And then there's the potential for scientific discovery, too. Think about modeling biological systems.
Yeah.
And colonies, beehives. Even the human brain using LLM-guided agents. It can help us understand how those systems actually work and evolve at a whole new level.
It's not just about practical problems. It's about unlocking knowledge about life itself. That said, I'm sure there are some pretty big challenges to overcome before any of this becomes reality. What are some of the biggest hurdles?
But one is definitely computational power. Just the sheer processing power needed to run these LLMs, especially if we're talking about swarms of agents. Right now, those models are super resource intensive.
So we need to figure out how to make them more efficient,
Yes.
less demanding on processing power if we want to actually use them in real-world scenarios.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research happening right now looking into things like model compression and specialized hardware for AI. But then there's also the issue of safety
Yeah, of course.
and reliability. If you have a bunch of robots running around in the real world,
Yeah.
you need to be absolutely sure they're going to behave properly.
Right, and that they're not going to cause any harm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure that level of safety and reliability when you have a system that's constantly learning and adapting? That's a huge challenge.
Huge.
We need to develop ways to rigorously test these systems, make sure they can handle all sorts of situations. Plus, we need ways to monitor and control their behavior in real time.
It's not just a technical challenge, it's an ethical one.
Absolutely. It might even require new legal
It
frameworks.
sounds like it's going to take a massive collaborative effort to really make this happen.
It's going to take researchers, developers, policymakers, even the public. It's a huge challenge. But the potential benefits are enormous.
Okay, so now that we've talked about, some future applications and some of the challenges, let's get back to the research itself. We were talking about how they tackled bird flocking. How did they set up that simulation?
So in this case, the LLM was in charge of controlling a single bird within a flock. And it had to use those 3 flocking principles that we talked about: separation, alignment, and cohesion. And just like with the ants, it didn't have any visual input.
So it was getting those text descriptions again?
Exactly. It was only getting text descriptions of like the positions and headings of nearby birds.
Okay, so based on that, it had to output a new heading for its bird, making sure it was following those flocking rules. I imagine that came with its own set of challenges.
It definitely did.
Yeah.
Initially, the LLM really struggled to give its decisions in a way that the simulation could understand. Took a lot of work to get it to output a heading angle that would actually work for the bird.
So they had to solve that formatting issue first. But even after they did that, did the LLM-driven birds flock successfully, or were there other hurdles to overcome?
Well, it got pretty close. But even after they fixed the format, the birds were still a bit all over the place. Sometimes they'd turn in the wrong direction, or they wouldn't adjust their heading at the same time as their neighbors. They really had to get creative with their prompts to get the LLM to perform better.
It sounds like getting the LLM to actually understand and follow those flocking principles was tough. What was the thing that finally got those birds flocking the right way?
Well, they found that adding a rationale field to the LLM's output made a big difference. So instead of just giving a new heading, the LLM actually had to explain its reasoning, like step by step, taking each flocking principle into account.
Oh, so they forced it to show its work.
Right. And by doing that, it actually got better at following the rules.
Wow, that's so interesting. So even for an AI, explaining your thought process can actually help you understand things better.
Yeah, it seems like it. So with this rationale thing in place, the LLM-driven birds could flock pretty well. They formed those nice cohesive groups, and they were showing those classic flocking behaviors. But there was one interesting difference they noticed.
Really? What was that?
The LLM-driven birds tended to hang out more at the edges of the flock. They were further away from the center than the rule-based birds.
Huh. That is interesting. Why do you think that is? Is it possible that the LLM was understanding those spatial cues a little differently?
It's hard to say for sure, but it does make you think. Maybe because the LLMs is processing everything through text, it came up with a slightly different idea of, the best place to be in the flock.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just because of that rationale constraint. Maybe it was being a bit more cautious with its movements.
So even though they were flocking successfully, they might have been doing it with a different mindset than the rule-based birds.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so cool about using LLMs this way. It's not just about copying what nature already does, it's about finding new behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. It opens up this whole new world of possibilities when it comes to understanding collective intelligence. If we can study how LLMs learn these behaviors, maybe we can design systems that are even more efficient and adaptable, maybe even more creative than what we see in nature.
That's amazing. So we've covered a lot today. We've seen how LLMs can learn to guide swarm behavior in these simulations. We talked about applications challenges and even some of the ethical things we need to think about. As we wrap up, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that this is really just the beginning. We've just scratched the surface of what we can do with this LLM-guided swarm intelligence. There's so much more to explore, and we can use this tech in so many ways.
And it's not just about copying nature, it's about using this to find new and better solutions to problems and to really understand these complex systems.
Exactly. And one last thing I'll leave you with is this. If we can figure out how to use LLMs to guide swarms of agents, what can we really achieve? I mean, can we create systems that not only solve tough problems, but are also super creative and adaptable? Maybe even more than natural systems. It's something to think about.
It really is. Well, it's been a mind-blowing deep dive into the world of LLMs and swarm intelligence. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking those big questions.